We will pursue our manifest destiny into the stars, launching American astronauts to plant the stars and stripes on the planet Mars.
Bold words, a classic America First declaration. But it raises an interesting question. Why go to Mars exactly? The Cold War is long over, yet we still talk about landing on Mars like it's a territory to be claimed. Besides, is it really the first time we tried to plant the stars and stripes on the red planet? Think about it. By the 1970s, the USA had already flown humans to the moon and back 6 times. We also had probes, rovers, and satellites on and around Mars, and yet it remained untouched by human feet. But what if that small step for a man in the red sand was actually taken decades ago, and we just weren't told about it? 2 words for you: Project Red Sun. Ever heard of it? Nah, probably not. Most people haven't. And yet, whispers of a top-secret interplanetary program keep surfacing to this day, suggesting that NASA, alongside the Soviets, may have sent humans to Mars all the way back then in the 1970s. Crazy? Yeah, maybe. Sure sounds that way. But there are documents, photos, even video footage. It's much more than even some declassified space projects of the Cold War could ever hope to show. So, what's really going on here? Is Project Red Sun truly a lost chapter of space history, or the biggest hoax since Ronald Reagan's Star Wars program? Could the US really go to another planet without telling us? And why on Earth, or Mars for that matter, would the government keep it a secret from us? Mars has always been the dream. Long before rockets, before telescopes, ancient civilizations gazed up at the red planet and imagined gods, war, and distant worlds teeming with life. Then science took over. Fast forward to the space race. The 1950s and 1960s were a full-throttle sprint between the US and the Soviet Union over who could prove their technological dominance first. The Soviets got the first satellite up there with Sputnik. The first man in space? Again, the Soviets with Yuri Gagarin. America, not to be outdone, responded with Apollo. And in 1969, Neil Armstrong stepped onto the moon. From that moment, the next logical step seemed clear: Mars. But then something strange happened. A series of moon landings was a resounding success. But after Apollo 17 in 1972, the entire manned space program just stopped. The remaining missions canceled. What the heck? Funding cut. Public interest gone. Suddenly, space wasn't the future anymore. It was just an afterthought at congressional budgetary hearings. At least officially, some might say. Because here's the thing, this was still the Cold War. The US and the Soviet Union weren't exactly in the habit of sharing secrets. There were classified military projects, deep space surveillance programs, even Cold War-era UFO research hidden behind layers of government silence. So when NASA suddenly abandoned the moon, with Mars just sitting there, some people started asking questions, and that's when the rumors started. Then full-on theories crept in. You might even call them conspiracy theories. And Hollywood helped fuel the fire. In 1978, a movie called Capricorn 1 hit theaters. It told the story of a faked Mars landing secretly staged in a studio because the actual mission was doomed to fail. Government agents cover it up. Astronauts get silenced. And I think you know what I mean by silenced. It was every space conspiracy theory wrapped into one. And of course, people started wondering, what if it wasn't just fiction? Because on the other side of the rumor mill was Project Red Sun, a whispered tale of a secret manned mission to Mars in the early 70s, allegedly covered up by NASA and the US government. Not fake, but real, and still totally classified. One could say that the objective of the Capricorn 1 movie was to make a Mars mission look so impossible that any actual leaks about it would be inevitably dismissed and marginalized. And spoiler alert, there were leaks. And not just minor ones. There were a few documents, a handful of blurry images, and, most intriguing of all, actual footage of a mission supposedly filmed on Mars. So, is there any truth to it? Or is this just another case of Cold War paranoia mixed in with Hollywood fantasy? Let's take a closer look. Now, just to be clear, officially, NASA has never sent humans to Mars. Every rover, every probe, every satellite was unmanned. Every Mars mission we've ever heard about, totally robotic. But for decades, a different version of events has been lurking in the shadows. A version where Mars wasn't just studied from afar, but visited by a small select crew. A version where NASA, in complete secrecy, pulled off one of the greatest technological feats in human history, and then buried the evidence for some unknown reason. They call it Project Red Sun. Now, if that name wasn't familiar to you prior to this video, don't worry, you're not alone. I myself stumbled upon it only recently while digging into Cold War's secret space programs. And great googly moogly, was I ever hooked by what I saw? According to these claims, Project Red Sun was a joint US-Soviet mission designed to land humans on Mars at the height of the Cold War. The alleged launch date, June 10th, 1973. The crew consisted of 3 astronauts, Colonel Elliot C. Jr., an experienced U.S. pilot, Major William Rutledge, supposedly an Air Force officer assigned to secret space programs, and Vladimir Ilyushin, a Soviet test pilot, rumored, get this, to have been the first man in space before Yuri Gagarin. Mind blown. If this mission was real, it was completely off the books. But why? Well, on the surface, the US and the USSR were rivals in the space race. But behind closed doors, they needed each other. Let's be real, neither side had the resources to put humans on Mars alone. So if Project Red Sun really happened, it means that some top-level diplomacy took place behind the scenes and actually succeeded. Somehow. And the mission didn't launch from the Kennedy Space Center or the Baikonur Cosmodrome. It launched from a hidden facility deep in the Amazon rainforest where no one would be watching. Why there, you might ask? Because at the height of the Cold War, the world's major superpowers were constantly monitoring each other. Satellites kept a close eye on the US, Europe, the USSR, and China, tracking every possible missile or rocket launch. But South America, no nuclear superpowers, no reason to watch anything. And then there's the spacecraft itself. The Project Red Sun mission allegedly used a spacecraft called ISV Columbus, an interplanetary vehicle adapted from Apollo-era technology. It was supposedly built to sustain a long journey through deep space. After a 158-day flight, the Columbus crew allegedly entered orbit around Mars in December of 1973. A landing module detached, touching down on the Martian surface. The astronauts stepped onto alien soil, conducted basic experiments, and, if this story is to be believed, sent back live reports. Proof you're already looking at it. The first evidence of Project Red Sun emerged in the early 2000s when a series of leaked photographs started circulating online. These grainy, poorly scanned images showed astronauts in bulky suits walking on a red-hued desert, a habitat module partially buried in dust, and a Mars rover parked in the distance. Skeptics, of course, dismissed them as fakes, poor Photoshop jobs, and misidentified lunar images from Apollo missions. But for those who believed, these were breadcrumbs, pieces of a puzzle leading to a classified space program that had been erased from history. Then came the testimonies. In 2011, an Italian journalist deliciously named Luca Scantamburlo held a press conference claiming to have uncovered proof of a secret Mars mission. His source was an anonymous whistleblower with an elaborate codename, Bravo X Sierra 24, who allegedly had access to declassified NASA documents. According to these files, Project Red Sun was real. 3 astronauts did indeed land on Mars in 1973, and all of it was recorded, but kept hidden from the public. And then came the video. A strange, low-quality piece of footage surfaced. It showed a spacecraft window looking down on Mars, grainy colors, strange framing, and degraded film quality. For believers, this was it. Authentic footage of the Columbus spacecraft approaching the red planet. But there was something else. Right after landing, the external camera of the craft captured this: a blurred, indistinct shape moving across the Martian surface. It couldn't be a dust storm, and supposedly nothing except wind moves on the surface of this long-dead planet. So, was this something alive? No idea. But the proponents of Project Red Sun claim that this footage is precisely why the whole thing was classified. Because if true, Mars turned out to be more than habitable. Possibly, it is home to an entire underground alien civilization. Yeah, right. NASA, of course, denied everything. Photos, hoaxes, testimonies, fabrications, footage, a crude internet fake. But here's the thing: the secrecy surrounding Cold War space missions and the abrupt end of Apollo were too much of a temptation to not keep looking for something more than a boring official story. See, if we had the technology to go further than the moon, then why the heck did we stop? And this rabbit hole goes even deeper, my friends. If the idea of a secret manned mission to Mars sounds unbelievable, buckle up, because this next claim is even more mind-blowing. If Project Red Sun really happened, who says that NASA stopped at Mars? What if, in complete secrecy, they sent humans even farther? All the way to Jupiter. Here's Project Red Spot for you. I uncovered this while searching for details of Project Red Sun. In this case, yet another leak occurred in the 2010s, and this time, the anonymous NASA whistleblower, totally awesomely codenamed Hector Zero Alpha X, claimed it all happened back in 1985. And just like with Project Red Sun, his evidence is scarce, fragmented, and deeply controversial. But we, being as open-minded as ever, will, of course, take a look. And I promise, you've never seen anything like this. According to Project Red Spot claims, this Jupiter mission took place in 1985, a time when NASA's official focus was on the Space Shuttle program, which, by the way, was strictly limited to Earth's orbit, and low Earth orbit at that. But behind the scenes, a highly classified interplanetary mission was supposedly carried out under a project so secret, even most high-ranking officials in NASA had no idea it existed. The details of this mission are scarce, to say the least. Names of the supposed crew members have surfaced over the years, but none could be confirmed. Some say the crew included U.S. Air Force pilots, handpicked for their expertise in high-stakes experimental missions. Others believe they were NASA astronauts, possibly even those from the Apollo program who mysteriously retired early. And then there are the more extreme theories, those who claim the mission involved personnel from military space programs that technically don't even exist. One supposed crew member, Major Jonathan Eastwood, is frequently mentioned in online forums. The problem: no such person exists in any military or NASA record. Another name, Dr. Emmett Fairbanks, was supposedly the mission's chief scientist, but the only Emmett Fairbanks you'll find in public records was a horse trainer in Kentucky. Then there's the strangest one of all, Commander O.J. Simpson. Yes, that O.J. Simpson. He starred in the Capricorn 1 movie in 1978 about a fake Mars landing staged by the government, and now was doing the real thing, just on Jupiter. And here is the video that has to prove it all. Much like the supposed Mars footage from Project Red Sun, grainy, shaky clips of what appears to be a spacecraft near Jupiter began surfacing on obscure internet forums in the late 2010s. The most famous clip, known as Jupiter orbit footage, appears to show a spacecraft moving past the turbulent clouds of Jupiter, its silhouette barely visible against the swirling storms of the gas giant. But wait just a doggone minute, you might say. Why even go to Jupiter if it is a gas giant? You can't plant the stars and stripes where there's no surface. You literally cannot stand on Jupiter. And that's where this gets even more outlandish. The objective of Project Red Spot wasn't to land on Jupiter or its moons, just to orbit the gas giant and investigate strange signals coming from its stormy depths. See, years before, NASA's deep space probes had detected anomalous signals emanating from Jupiter's Great Red Spot, and they didn't seem natural. Some claim they followed a pattern, almost as if someone or something was trying to communicate. Ooh. The US government supposedly just couldn't ignore it, so they launched a mission to find out what was really going on. This clip is referred to as Jupiter Transmission Anomaly and allegedly contains a garbled, almost robotic voice, believed to be an astronaut communicating with mission control. Some claim you can make out panicked breathing, urgent commands, and a chilling phrase repeated twice.
We're not alone. We are not alone.
Man, it gives me the chills. But let's step back a moment. A mission to Jupiter in 1985? A real classified spacecraft that traveled over 500 million miles in complete secrecy? A missing Apollo astronaut? An Air Force pilot with no records? And O.J. Simpson on board? Okay. If you've already caught on that I just made this whole thing up, good instincts. But if not, it's okay, we've all been there. Let me reiterate, everything you just saw and heard is completely fake. Have you noticed that the codename of the alleged whistleblower of Project Red Spot, Hector Zero Alpha X, is a hidden reference to the word hoax? The names, the footage, it's all pure nonsense. And yet, if I hadn't told you that, if I just left you with those last cryptic pieces of so-called evidence, how many of you would have started Googling secret Jupiter mission, Project Red Spot, O.J. Simpson in space, and found forums filled with even wilder speculation? This is how conspiracy theories start. A blurry video, a name that doesn't quite check out, but makes sense in some weird way. And suddenly, a fictional event starts to feel real. And the same goes for Project Red Sun. Despite the fact that it's been around for decades and provided footage, it doesn't stand up to a critical look. Well, the story of a secret Mars mission is thrilling. It falls apart the moment we start looking for real, concrete evidence. Let's start with the biggest problem. There are no official records. Zero. Zilch. Nada. Bupkis. Not in NASA's archives, not in the Department of Defense's declassified files, not even in old Soviet-era documents, which have been heavily scrutinized since the fall of the USSR. No mission logs, no flight plans, no crew assignments. And that's strange, because while top-secret missions surely existed, we eventually see at least some evidence of them. The US military's Corona spy satellites were classified for decades, but we have full documentation now. The Soviet Almaz space station, which had a hidden military purpose, also confirmed. But Project Red Sun, not a trace. Then there's the astronaut problem. The Red Sun mission allegedly included Colonel Elliot C. Jr., an Apollo-era astronaut. But there's one tiny issue. He died in 1966. Officially, he was killed in a jet crash before he could fly his scheduled Gemini mission. But conspiracy theorists claim that was just a cover story, and that he was actually reassigned to a classified space program. That would be intriguing, except there's zero evidence to back it up. His death was publicly investigated, reported in newspapers, and well documented. His funeral was attended by family, fellow astronauts, and NASA officials. If he was secretly reassigned, the cover-up would have involved hundreds of people, from doctors to journalists to NASA's own leadership. And then there's Vladimir Ilyushin, the Soviet cosmonaut, allegedly involved in the mission. Ilyushin was a real test pilot, one of the best. And yes, there is an old rumor that he was actually the first man in space, but that something went wrong with his flight and the USSR covered it up. But him being sent to Mars, that's pure fiction. He was an active public figure in the Soviet Union until the 2000s. If he had secretly gone to Mars, somehow survived, and returned to Earth, wouldn't that have left a few obvious signs? But let's get to the real smoking gun, the footage. The so-called Red Sun mission video is supposedly leaked NASA footage from 1973. It's grainy, low resolution, and has that washed out color palette that makes it feel authentic. But here's the problem. It doesn't match the actual Apollo-era film. NASA used high-quality 16mm cameras for spaceflight documentation. The footage from Apollo missions, even the ones recorded in difficult conditions, is crisper, smoother, and more stable than what we see in the Red Sun clips. The Mars footage, in contrast, looks like it was downgraded on purpose, as if someone was trying to mimic the look of vintage space recordings without actually using the right equipment. And then we have signs of digital manipulation. Experts in video forensics have pointed out a lot of inconsistencies in the Red Sun footage. They are literally constructed from existing media files of real space missions, superimposed with various images from Mars probes. All that's up there on Wikipedia. For example, this one shows a part of the International Space Station, but instead of the Earth and Soyuz spacecraft docking, there's a Mars image from the Global Surveyor probe. Just some blur and shaky cam effect, and suddenly it looks top secret. We actually did the same trick with footage from the Juno spacecraft in the Space Shuttle program, and that only took my video editor like 15 minutes. Oh, and the footage of some underground Martian life form, taken straight out of the Alternative 3 mockumentary released in 1977. The clip that was created to mock conspiracy theories ends up in one of them. Oh, the irony. And so on and so forth. There's literally not a single shot in Project Red Sun's footage that hasn't been faked. And finally, there's the most obvious problem, even without considering the footage: the logistics of the whole thing. In the early 1970s, the only rocket capable of launching humans into deep space was the Saturn V. And we know exactly how many of them were built, when they were used, and what happened to the ones that weren't. And yet, according to the Project Red Sun theory, NASA somehow managed to launch a secret interplanetary mission without anyone noticing. A Saturn V rocket is 110 meters tall, produces 3,400 tons of thrust, and creates a shockwave that can be heard and felt from multiple dozens of miles away. The Apollo missions were public spectacles, watched by thousands of spectators and tracked by independent observatories all around the world. And we're supposed to believe that one just took off quietly somehow from a hidden launch site and nobody outside of a tiny inner circle ever noticed? By the way, forget about the Amazon rainforest. It would take decades to build a launch pad in a place like this, and bringing this giant rocket there is well nigh impossible. In the end, it just doesn't add up. So let's be honest, Project Red Sun was a myth from the start. It's an amazing story, a fantastic what-if scenario, but it has no foundation in reality. Just like the fake Project Red Spot mission we made up, it relies on grainy images, unverifiable sources, and an appeal to secrecy. And while that secrecy makes the story compelling, it also makes it impossible to disprove in the eyes of true believers. Because even after all these debunks, a bunch of people will still believe in it. You know what else they're absolutely sure of? Take this image, captured recently by NASA's Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter. It shows a strikingly rectangular formation on the Martian surface, perfectly straight edges with sharp corners. It almost looks like a buried structure, an artificial slab, maybe even the ruins of something ancient. The internet, of course, exploded with this discovery. Alien base? Secret Mars installation, the long-lost remains of a civilization that NASA doesn't want us to know about. And then planetary geologists came along and ruined all the fun. According to experts, this is just a natural rock formation, likely caused by fracturing and erosion. Mars has a thin atmosphere, extreme temperature shifts, and constant dust storms that shape the landscape in bizarre ways not quite seen on Earth, and thus seeming unnatural to us. So, whether it's a strange rock, an optical illusion, or a missing page in space history, our brains love to fill in the blanks with mystery. It's what we do. We're wired to see patterns and hidden connections even when they aren't really there. And sure, sometimes this leads to wild speculation about secret NASA cover-ups and interplanetary conspiracies. But other times, it leads to real discoveries. Mars was so captivating to explore from the very beginning precisely because astronomers of the late 19th century saw an ever-changing system of canals there, a supposed sign of an alien species trying to survive. But even as the first probes showed us that this was merely a mirage, an illusion painted by imagination, Mars still turned out to be incredible. Trust me, we don't need secret missions to make it exciting. We've sent rovers that have uncovered ancient riverbeds, traces of organic molecules, even evidence of a once thriving atmosphere. We're getting closer every day to sending real humans there. And when we do land on Mars, this time for real, it won't be a secret. It'll be one of the greatest achievements in human history. So, keep questioning, keep exploring, but maybe let's try not to get too carried away with O.J. Simpson commanding deep space missions. See y'all next time. Take care and be good.